Delia was 61 years old, and she had spent the last years of her life nursing her mother, while her two sisters sent flowers and stayed away. So when the estate was settled, the sisters took the house in town, the savings, and the good car. What they left Delia was a condemned farmhouse with a dry well, a roof open to the sky, and $11,000 in back taxes owed against it. She paid her sisters $5 to sign it over clean, and they laughed when she did. Delia had nowhere else to go, so she loaded her old dog into the truck and moved into the ruin nobody in the family had wanted. She thought she had been handed the worthless one. She had no idea what her grandmother had sealed beneath that house, or what it would cost her to keep it. The lawyer's office sat above the hardware store in Hadley, up a flight of stairs that smelled of varnish and mouse poison. Delia climbed them slow. Her knees had opinions about stairs, and she was in no hurry to sit in a room with her sisters. Charlene had gotten there first, the way she always did. She had claimed the chair by the window with the good light, a leather folder open on her lap, her reading glasses pushed up into hair some salon in the city kept the color of a much younger woman's. Beverly sat next to her with her hands folded, studying the carpet like there was something written in it. "You're late," Charlene said, not looking up. "Bus runs when it runs." Delia took the last chair, the one that rocked on a short leg. She hadn't owned a car she trusted on the highway in years. The truck was for hauling, not for an hour each way into town. The lawyer was a tired man near retirement who had done their mother's will and their grandmother's before that. He talked the way you'd read a grocery list, like everything had already been decided somewhere else and he was only reading it out. He started with the house in town, then the accounts at the credit union, then the certificates of deposit, then the car with 40,000 miles on it. Delia watched her sisters' faces make small, satisfied movements as each thing found its owner. The townhouse went to Charlene, who lived closest and had kept it up. The savings split two ways, Charlene and Beverly. The car to Beverly. Delia stopped keeping track and just watched the window, where a pigeon was walking the ledge like it paid rent. "And the property on the Ledbetter Road," the lawyer said. He cleared his throat. "The old home place, your grandmother's farm. Nadine left that to Delia by name." Charlene made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "That's fitting. There's a tax lien," the lawyer went on. 11,000 and change. The county's been carrying it a long while. Whoever takes the property takes the debt. So it's a gift and a bill," Charlene said. "How generous of Mama." Delia kept her eyes on the pigeon. She had learned a long time ago that the fastest way through a room with Charlene in it was to give her nothing to push against. The lawyer laid out one more page. To keep the estate clean, he explained he'd drawn a simple release. Delia would take the farm and its lien as her full share and sign away any claim to the rest. The sisters would sign away any claim to the farm. Everybody walked out square. Nobody could come back on anybody. "I'll need a token consideration on the transfer," he said. $1's fine. Makes it binding. $1. Charlene finally looked at Delia then, over the top of her glasses. "Delia, honey, that place isn't worth $1. The roof's caved. Grandma's been dead 30 years and nobody's lived in it since. You'll be paying that lien till you're 80. I know what it's worth," Delia said. "Do you? Because you could sign the release and let the county take it for the taxes and be free of the whole thing." "Walk away." Charlene said it kindly, which was the worst way she said anything. "You don't have anywhere to put a dog in a truck, Delia. Be smart for once." For once, Charlene always tucked the meanness in soft, where it would sit the longest. Delia reached into her coat and took out her wallet, the vinyl one with the broken snap she'd carried since her husband died. She counted out 5 ones onto the lawyer's blotter and pushed them across. "There's $5, she said. "It's mine now, Leon and all, and I never want to hear about the estate again. Any of it." The room went quiet for a second. Then Charlene laughed, really laughed, and Beverly caught it from her the way she caught everything from her. And the two of them sat there in the good light laughing at their sister who just paid $5 for a ruin and a debt. The lawyer had the decency to look at his hands. "Well," Charlene said, dabbing under her eye, "nobody can say you didn't get your inheritance." Delia signed where the man pointed. Her signature came out smaller than she meant it to. Beverly signed, and Charlene signed with a flourish, and it was done. On the walk down the varnished stairs, Delia heard Charlene's heels behind her and Charlene's voice saying, "Low," to Beverly, $5. Lord, some people are just built to lose. At the bottom of the stairs, Beverly touched her sleeve. Delia. She had their mother's eyes, and for a second they were soft. You could come stay with us a while, till you get on your feet. I could ask Charlene. Ask Charlene. Delia gently took her arm back. That's the trouble with you, Bev. You always have to go ask Charlene first. Beverly's hand fell. Whatever had opened in her face closed up again, and she went to catch her sister, and Delia stood in the stairwell and let her go. They took everything that could be spent. They left her the one thing that couldn't. Delia didn't know that yet. She only knew her sisters were laughing, and that she'd rather be the one they laughed at than the one who scattered. Here's what the laughing didn't account for, because none of them had been there for it. 4 years. That was how long Delia had lived in their mother's spare room with the plastic-covered mattress, learning to lift a grown woman without hurting either of them, learning which pills went with food and which on an empty stomach, learning the thin quiet of 3 in the morning when a person you love is afraid and there's nothing to do but hold their hand and lie a little. Charlene had sent a check every month and a fruit basket every Christmas. Beverly had called on Sundays and cried on the phone about how hard it was for her. Delia had been the one in the room. She'd given up her job for it. She had worked 31 years at a wholesale nursery, 2 counties over, in the propagation houses, the long glass buildings where cuttings became plants. She could take a snip of almost anything, a stem, a leaf with a bit of heel on it, and set it in sand and mist and coax roots out of it where there'd been none. It was the one thing she was truly good at, growing life out of a piece that had been cut off from its own. The nursery had held her job as long as they could, and then let it go. And she hadn't blamed them. Her husband had been gone 17 years by then, a heart attack at 44 while he was under a truck at the shop, there and then not there between one breath and the next. They'd never had children. For a long time that had been the great sorrow of her life. Sitting in that lawyer's office at 61 with $5 less than she'd walked in with, she thought maybe it had been a mercy. She had no one to disappoint. She had a dog. Dutch was a black and tan hound going gray at the muzzle, 13 if he was a day, with hips that clicked and a nose that still worked better than anything the government could build. He'd been her husband's dog first, and then hers, and he had slept against the small of her back every night for so long that she couldn't fall asleep without the weight of him. And she had her grandmother's knife, a paring knife with a bone handle worn smooth and yellow, the blade sharpened down narrow from decades of use. Iva had peeled a lifetime of apples with it. It was the only thing of her grandmother's that Delia had asked for when she was young, and the only thing nobody had bothered to fight her over. That was the whole of it. A truck, a dog, a knife, and a farm the county wanted to take. She drove out to see it the next morning because she had nowhere to sleep but there. The home place sat at the end of the road, past where the pavement gave up and turned to gravel, past a bridge over a creek that ran low and brown. Delia hadn't been out this far since she was a girl. Her grandmother had died when Delia was 10, and after that the family let the place go. They meant to deal with it later and never did. 60 years it sat empty. The road remembered more of it than she did. She almost missed the turn. Kudzu had swallowed the fence line and half the mailbox post. The lane up to the house was 2 ruts with a green spine of grass between them, and the truck bottomed out twice before the house came into view through the trees. It was worse than she'd let herself picture. The front porch had pulled away from the house and sagged like a lip. Half the tin roof over the back was gone, peeled back and rusted, so you could stand in the yard and see sky through the second-story windows. The smokehouse off to the side was a green mound with a chimney sticking out of it. Kudzu groaned clean over the top. Delia sat in the truck with the engine ticking and looked at all of it and felt her chest go tight. Well, she said out loud, to Dutch or to herself. Nobody said it'd be easy. Dutch's answer was to stand up on the seat, put his nose to the crack of the window, and start to whine low and steady, a sound she'd rarely heard out of him. The house wasn't locked. There was no lock left to work. The front door swung in on a hall that smelled of dust and animals and old rain, wallpaper hanging off the walls in tons, a staircase going up into the part of the house that was open to the weather. Delia went careful, testing the floor with each step before she gave it her weight. The boards held. Whoever had built this house had built it to stand, even after everyone quit it. The rooms downstairs were dim and dry, the parlor with a stone fireplace choked with a bird's nest, the front room where a horsehair couch had rotted down to its frame. In the kitchen, a cast-iron stove stood rusted solid, and against the far wall a dry sink with a hand pump, the handle frozen, the pipe below it feeding down into a well that hadn't given water in longer than she'd been alive. She worked the pump handle anyway. It didn't move. Whatever water this house had run on was gone. She stood there with her hand on the cold iron and let herself remember, which she mostly tried not to do. She'd been a girl the last time this pump gave water. 7, 8 years old, sent out to the home place for a week in the summer while her folks did whatever grown people did. Iva would work that handle 3 hard strokes, and the water would come up out of the ground so cold it ached your teeth, so clean it had no taste at all and every taste at once. Delia had never had water like it since. Not from a tap, not from a jug, not from the fancy spring water Charlene set out at Thanksgiving in the green glass bottles. Her grandmother had caught her drinking straight off the spout more than once and never told her to quit. "You remember where good water comes from," the old woman had said once, with her hand cupped under Delia's chin, a hand that smelled of apples and lye soap. "Everything else they can take off you. Not that. You hold on to that." Delia hadn't turned those words over in 50 years. Standing in the wrecked kitchen, she turned them over now and thought about how the water had quit sometime after Iva died, and how not one person in her family had ever once said why. She spent the day doing what she could, which wasn't much. She swept a corner of the front room clear and set up the camp cot she'd bought at the surplus store, and a lantern, and a 2-burner propane ring, and the cooler with what food she had. A tarp went up over the worst of the upstairs hole from the inside, which did nothing but make her feel like she'd done something. By dark, she was filthy and every joint she owned had a complaint, and she sat on the cot and ate cold beans out of the can with Iva's paring knife because she couldn't find a spoon. $5, she said to Dutch, and laughed, because if she didn't laugh she'd do the other thing. Night came down hard out there, darker than town dark, the kind with no bottom to it. The house talked to itself, tin lifting and settling in the wind, something small moving in the walls. Delia lay on the cot with the lantern turned low and Dutch at her feet, and she thought she'd never sleep. And then she was asleep. She woke because the dog was gone from her feet. The lantern had burned down to a coal. In the gray of it, she could see Dutch across the room, at the doorway to the little pantry off the kitchen, and he was digging. His nails raked the floor, scrabbling at the boards, and the whine had come back, higher now, urgent. Dutch, leave it. She'd known him 13 years, and he'd never once dug at a floor. He was a hound who'd chase a rabbit across a county but wouldn't cross a wet yard if he could help it. Dutch. He didn't leave it. He looked back at her, eyes catching the last of the light, then put his nose back down to the seam of the floor and dug harder, and let out a bark, one sharp note that cracked around the empty house. Delia got up. Her feet were cold on the boards. She took the lantern and turned the wick up and crossed to the pantry, and the dog moved aside for her but didn't leave, pressing against her leg, trembling, his whole attention fixed on the floor. The pantry floor was covered in cracked linoleum, a pattern of yellow flowers gone brown, glued down and curled up at the edges. She got down on her knees with a grunt and held the lantern close. Under the curled edge where Dutch had been digging, the wood didn't run the way it should. The boards stopped. There was a straight line across them, too straight to be a crack, and then another line running square to it. She set the lantern down and worked her fingers under the edge of the linoleum and pulled. It came away in a long, brittle sheet, dust rising off it, and she coughed and waved it clear and looked. Cut into the pantry floor, its outline plain now that the covering was gone, was a square, a door in the floor, hinged on one side, and set into the near edge, black with rust but unmistakable, an iron ring lying flat in a routed groove where a hand could get under it. A trap door. In a house where the family had lived and died, And no one had ever once in all of Delia's life said a single word about a room beneath it. Dutch had gone dead quiet. Delia knelt there a long moment, her heart going harder than the work called for. Then she reached down, hooked 2 fingers through the cold ring, braced her other hand on the boards, and pulled. The door came up slow and heavy, groaning on hinges nobody had oiled in her lifetime, and a breath of air rose out of the dark below it. Cold air, not the damp, rotten cold of the well, but a dry, clean cold, like the inside of a stone church in winter. Dutch backed off 2 steps and sat, ears up, and watched the hole. Delia held the lantern down into it. Stone steps went down, hand-cut and even, maybe 8 of them, into a room. She could see the edge of a shelf, the round shoulder of a jar. For a long moment she only sat on the pantry floor, understanding that she was looking at a room her mother had grown up over, her grandmother had lived over, and no living person had ever told her existed. Waiting for daylight would have been the sensible thing. She went down anyway, testing each stone 1 hand flat against the cool wall. The room was bigger than she'd guessed, dug square and lined all the way around with dry-laid stone, the ceiling low enough that she stood with her head bent. A root cellar. Along one wall, wooden shelves held rows of canning jars furred with dust, their contents gone black and unknowable inside the glass. The stone was laid up tight, without mortar, fitted the same careful way as the walls above. A workbench ran under the shelves. A real bench, its top scarred and burned and worn to a shine in one spot where a person's forearm had rested through years of work. Tools hung on nails above it. Hand tools, a brace and bit, a draw knife, things for wood and things for stone. It was cool and it was dry and it was, in its way, more solid than the house rotting above it. Somebody had built this to last past them. Somebody had cared more about what went underground here than about anything they left standing in the light. "Who were you?" Delia said to the dark, "and why'd nobody ever say your name?" She didn't sleep much the rest of that night. In the morning, she made instant coffee on the propane ring and drank it on the caved porch, watching the sun come up over a yard she now owned, and she was still sitting there when a truck came up the ruts. It was an old flatbed, older than hers, and the man who climbed out of it was tall and stooped and easily 70, with white in his close-cut hair and a way of standing that took his time about everything. He lifted a hand. "Saw a light out here last night," he called. "Place has been dark since before you were born. Figured it was either a squatter or a ghost, and I don't much fear either. One, so I came to look. Little bit of both, maybe." Delia stood up off the step. "It's mine. I'm Delia, Nadine's girl. Iva Hollis was my grandmother." That stopped him. He came a few steps closer and looked at her, really looked, placing her face against the faces he used to know. "Iva Hollis," he said. "Lord, you've got her chin." He put out a wide, dry hand. "Odell, I farm the bottom land down the road. What I still farm. Knew this place when it was a place." He shook his head at the ruin of it. "You aiming to live in this? Don't have much choice about it." "No," he said, looking at her cot and her cooler through the doorway. "I don't guess you do." He didn't ask the questions town people asked. He didn't ask where her money was, or where her people were, or how a woman her age came to be camped in a condemned house at the end of a dead road. He walked the yard with her instead, naming things she'd lost the names of: the smokehouse under the kudzu, the stumps of the old orchard, the low place where a barn had stood. When they came around the north side, he stopped at the stone lip of the dead well and looked at it a while. "Your grandmother had the sweetest water in this county," he said. "You know that? People drove out here with jugs, my mother among them. Coffee tasted better made on Hollis water, she used to swear it. Then, one summer, it just quit. Bad drought year, I was a young man. Everybody's wells drew down that year. But yours never came back, even when the rain did." Folks said the vein moved. He shrugged. "Land does what it does." "When was that?" "Oh," he worked it out. "You'd have been a little thing. Right around when Iva passed, come to think. Water quit and me old woman quit. Close together." He looked at the sky. "Land don't care whose name is on the paper, Delia. It answers to whoever works it. This place hasn't been worked in a long, long time. She didn't tell him about the room under the pantry. She didn't know why she kept it back, only that it felt like hers first, something to understand before she handed it to anyone else. He came back the next morning with a coil of stovepipe and a box of canning lids he claimed he had no use for, which she doubted, and he helped her run the pipe without being asked and left before she could thank him. It had been longer than she could name since somebody gave her a thing and wanted nothing back for it. The next weeks were the hardest physical work of Delia's life, and she had spent 3 decades hauling flats of plants. She had come out here with almost nothing and a debt hanging over her, so first she made the place hold her. She patched the sound half of the roof with tin off the barn ruin and tar she bought on credit at the store. The front rooms she scrubbed down to bare wood. The cast iron stove she got broke loose and burning so she could cook and boil water hauled in jugs from town. Water was the daily misery. She hauled it in 5 plastic jugs from a spigot behind the church, 40 pounds at a time up the porch steps, and it was never enough. Not for washing and cooking and the plants both. She rationed it like money. A woman who'd grown up over the sweetest spring in the county was buying her drinking water off a store shelf, and the joke of it was not lost on her. And she went at the land the only way she knew, which was to look for what was still alive in it. The orchard wasn't all dead. Under the choke of sumac and briar, she found 4 old apple trees still standing, gnarled and half wild, and one of them, when she cut into a low limb, showed green under the bark. She pruned it hard, cleared the ground around its feet, and talked to it low, the same voice she'd used on 10,000 cuttings in the glass houses. In the old garden, she found a bed of asparagus gone to fern, coming up on its own year after year untended, and rhubarb, and a rose by the porch that was more thorn than anything, all of it left by hands that were dust now and still feeding whoever came. She took cuttings and rooted them in sand in the cool of the cellar, where the even temperature was better than any propagation bench she'd ever run. Money was the wall she kept hitting. The lien sat on the place like a stone. She took whatever work town would give a woman her age, put up other people's tomatoes and beans on shares at the cannery, sold rooted cuttings and starts out of the back of the truck at the Saturday market, potted things she'd pulled back from the dead. It came in nickels, it went out in dollars. One Saturday, a woman at the market turned over a pot of rooted fig Delia had pulled off a half-dead bush behind the smokehouse and asked the price. $1.50, Delia told her. The woman bought 6 for a hedge, came back the next week for more, and told a friend. It was not a living, but it was the first money the home place had made anybody in 6 decades, and Delia drove home with it folded in her shirt pocket and felt, for one afternoon, like the land had answered her back. The county had not forgotten her either. A letter came, forwarded twice, reminding her that $11,000 in interest sat against the property and that the office would welcome a payment plan or a discussion of its options. She knew what the options were. The letter went into the tea tin with her nickels, and she went back to work because there was nothing to do with a thing like that but outwork it or lose it. She met Eli at the feed store. He was maybe 19 and too thin, loading 50-pound sacks onto other people's trucks for whatever they'd tip him. Delia watched him work a while. He was quick, and he didn't complain, and he kept his eyes down, and when the man he'd loaded for drove off without giving him anything, the boy just turned and looked for the next truck. "You," she said. "You do day work? Depends what it pays." He didn't look up. "It pays what I've got, which isn't much, and dinner, which is real. I've got a cellar full of a lifetime of somebody's junk needs hauling up a set of steps. It's ugly work." Now he looked at her. He had a bruise going yellow at his cheekbone and a wariness that she recognized, having worn it herself in her time. "Dinner," he said, like he was testing whether she'd take it back. "Every day you work, and I don't ask questions if you don't." His name was Eli. He'd aged out of a bad situation with a worse one waiting, and had been sleeping in a hatchback behind the store for the better part of a month, though it took her 2 weeks of feeding him before he admitted the car part out loud. He was strong for his size and careful with his hands, and he took to the cellar work with a focus that told her plainly the boy was grateful to have somewhere he was allowed to be. That first evening she fed him at the plank table in the front room, pork and beans and cornbread off the iron stove, and he ate like he was afraid the plate would be taken back. Dutch put his gray head on the boy's knee, which Dutch did for almost nobody, and Eli's hand went down to the dog's ears and stayed there. "This your dog?" "My husband's, then mine. His name's Dutch. He's a good judge of people, better than I am." Eli didn't answer that, but he ate slower after, like somebody who'd decided the food was going to keep coming, and when he left, she made him carry off the last of the cornbread wrapped in a dish towel. And she said not one word about the car behind the feed store. Together they emptied the root cellar jar by jar, board by board. They carried up the black jars and buried their contents in the garden, where 60-year-old preserves could do some good at last. They swept a lifetime of dust off the workbench, and it was Eli, wiping down the far wall, who frowned and knocked on it with his knuckles and said, "Miss Delia, this ain't right." She came over with the lantern. The 3 walls of the cellar were dry-laid stone, fitted tight without mortar, the way the whole thing had been built. But the 4th wall, the far one, was brick, newer brick, laid up in gray mortar gone crumbly, filling what had plainly once been an opening. Somebody had walled off a doorway. Somebody had bricked a hole shut down here in the dark and then covered the whole cellar over and let the house forget it. "Root cellar don't need a room behind it," Eli said. "What's back there?" "I don't know." She ran her hand along the brick. Cold came off it, that same dry stone cold, but stronger here, and along the bottom edge where the mortar had failed there was a thread of air moving, steady, and it carried a smell she knew from 1,000 mornings in the misting houses, wet, the smell of water in a dry place. "You feel that," she said. Eli put his hand where hers had been, and his eyes went wide. Odell came by that evening, as he'd started to, and she took him down and showed him the brick wall and let him feel the air coming out at the bottom. He was quiet a long time. He pressed his broad hand flat to the brick and closed his eyes like he was listening through it. 60 years I've wondered where that water went," he said finally, soft. "And you're telling me your people walled it up and sat their house right on top of it. You think that's the well?" "No." He knocked the brick, listened to the sound. "Well's a hole you drop a bucket in. This is dug into the hill. This is a spring, Delia. A spring house maybe, built right into the ground. My daddy talked about the old-timers doing it. Spring so good they built a room around the head to keep it clean and cold." He stood back. Somebody didn't want this found. You don't wall up sweet water by accident. "Why would she, though?" Delia said. "Wall up her own water. People drove out here for it. That's the question." Odell picked a crumb of failed mortar loose and rolled it between his fingers. "Your grandmother wasn't a foolish woman. She did it for a reason, and she went to trouble to make sure the reason went in the ground with her. Only look here." He set his knuckle against the brick. "She left the door. People don't brick up a thing they mean gone forever. They brick up a thing they mean to be found by the right somebody, when the time's right." Delia thought about her sisters laughing in the good light of the lawyer's office. She thought about a man from the county who'd once told her mother the farm was worth the taxes on it, and not a dime more. She thought about Iva's hand under her chin, and everything else they can take off you. Not that. "I've been leaving something be," she said, "because it felt like mine to understand first. But I found it the first night. Before I knew any of this," she went to the workbench and opened the wide, shallow drawer under the burned spot where a forearm had worn the wood to a shine. The drawer she'd found stuck shut, and pried open her second day and not touched since, because what was in it had frightened her, without her understanding why. Inside was a tin box, the kind that once held tea, the paint on it gone soft-edged with age. She lifted it out and set it on the bench in the lantern light. Odell and Eli came to stand on either side of her. "I didn't open it," she said, kept meaning to. Kept not. She worked the lid. It came free with a small dry cough of a sound, and she looked down at what her grandmother had put away in the dark for whoever came after. On top lay a photograph, gone to Brown's, of a young woman standing square in front of this same house when its paint was white and its porch stood straight. She was not smiling. She had a set to her jaw and a paring knife in one hand and a bushel of apples at her feet, and Delia knew that jaw because it looked back at her out of the mirror every morning. Iva, young and hard and hers. Under the photograph lay a paring knife, bone-handled, worn yellow and smooth, the blade honed narrow, the twin of the one Delia carried in her own coat pocket right then. 2 knives, one for the girl who left, one for the girl who'd someday come back. Delia's throat closed on her, and under the knife lay a letter, folded in 3s, the paper soft as cloth from age, the ink gone brown. On the outside, in a plain hard hand, it was addressed to no name at all. It said only, "For whoever loves this place enough to stay." Delia's hands were not steady. Eli had gone still beside her. Odell reached over and turned up the lantern without a word. She lifted the letter out and unfolded it and began to read. "If you are reading this," the letter began, "then you came back to the home place and you stayed long enough to find the room, and that tells me most of what I need to know about you. So I will tell you the rest. My name is Iva Hollis, and this was my father's land before it was mine. Under your feet there is a spring, not a well. A spring, the head of it, the place where the water comes up out of the deep rock cold enough to ache your teeth. It has fed this family and half this valley since before there was a county to tax it. People called it the sweetest water in the country, and they were right. The summer the rains failed, a company came, men in good hats with papers, buying up water rights off farmers too dry and too scared to know what they were selling. They meant to pipe this valley's water off to the city and sell it back to us by the gallon. I was the last one they came to, since mine was the best, the head of the whole vein. They offered money. When I said no, they offered more. When I said no again, they stopped smiling. I am an old woman, and I have buried a husband and a son, and I do not scare the way I did when I was young, but I could not trust that the ones who came after me would be as stubborn as I am. Money is patient. It waits for a weak year and a tired heir. So I did the only thing I could think to do that would keep it out of their hands for good. I capped the spring head, and I walled up this room, and I let the whole county believe the water moved on. Let them think the vein went dry. A thing nobody knows about is a thing nobody can buy. I did not hide the water to keep it from people. I hid it to keep it from the ones who would sell it. There is a difference, and if you are the one reading this, I believe you already know it. A spring only stays sweet if it keeps giving. Cap it for one man and it turns. I have kept it capped a long time now, and I pray it forgives me. When it is safe, when the right hands find it, let it back out. Let it give again. That is the whole of what I am asking. Everything else they can take off you. Not the water. You hold on to that." There was more. She had signed it only with her initials, the same hard hand as the tag on the box, and below her name she had written one line that put a cold finger straight down Delia's spine. "I have told your mother where the water sleeps and why. She will know who to trust it to. I could not choose for her." Delia sat down on the cellar steps. The lantern threw her shadow up the wall, huge and wavering, and for a while she couldn't speak. Her mother had known. All those years, all that decline, the long fog at the end where Nadine forgot her own daughter's names, and somewhere under it, her mother had carried this. Delia thought about the will, about the home place left to her by name, and she didn't know whether it had been a choice or an accident. She would never get to ask. That was the part that took the wind out of her, the not getting to ask. "Miss Delia," Eli's voice was careful. "What's it say?" She read it to them, all of it in the cold under the ruined house. When she finished, Odell let out a long breath and took his cap off, which she had never seen him do. "Sweetest water in the county," he said. "It never left. It was under us the whole time." He looked at the bricked wall like it was a grave. "All this time, Iva, you stubborn old woman." She wanted it opened, Delia said. "When it was safe, when the right hands found it, and you reckon your hands are the right ones." Delia looked at the wall, at the thread of wet air coming out from under it. She thought about her sisters and the $5 and the sound of them laughing. "I reckon they're the only ones who stayed," she said. That night and the nights after, Delia went through the rest of what Iva had left down there. A whole shelf of ledgers stood against the stone, filled in that same hard hand, and they were not what she expected. They kept no accounts of money. They kept accounts of people, names and dates running back before the war, and beside each one, what Iva had given, a bushel of apples to a family whose crop had failed, a winter's worth of canning to a widow, beds in the summer kitchen for men walking the roads looking for work, fed and sent on with something in their pockets. Her grandmother had run a quiet poorhouse out here for 40 years and told nobody, and the water had paid for all of it, because water like that grew food like nothing else in the county could grow it. The place had been sweetest, Delia understood, when it was giving itself away. Folded into the last ledger was a stiff old paper with a county seal on it. She couldn't read half the language, but she read enough to know it had to do with the water, with the right to it. She set it aside careful and did not yet understand that she was holding the very thing her sister's lawyers had already started circling. They started on the wall the next morning. Odell knew things she didn't. He'd spent his working life bringing water up out of the ground, and he made her go slow when everything in her wanted to swing the sledge. You didn't just knock the head loose on an old capped spring, he told her. Pressure had been building behind that cap for decades, and water had killed men who forgot to respect it. They took the brick down one course at a time, and behind it was earth. And behind the earth, when they dug back 6 careful feet into the cold of the hill, was stone laid up around a fat iron pipe, and the pipe was sealed with a plug of lead and pitch gone hard as the rock around it. The work was brutal and it was slow. Some days they moved a foot. Delia's hands that had rooted 10,000 delicate things, cracked and bled and healed over rough. Eli worked beside her without being told, and somewhere in those weeks he stopped flinching when she came up behind him and started calling the place we instead of here. We ought to shore that up. We're low on lamp oil. One evening he asked her, not looking up from the shovel, whether a person could learn the plant thing, the rooting thing, or whether you had to be born knowing it. She told him nobody was born knowing it. She'd been shown herself by a woman at the nursery when Delia was younger than him and green as a June weed. He turned that over a while. Then teach me, he said. Still working, and she said, all right, and something settled between the two of them that never needed saying again. Then the roof of the dugback came down. It happened at the end of a long day, a slow slide of wet earth that buried the work they'd done and filled the cut with mud and stinking water to the knee. No one was under it, by God's grace or Dutch's, who had barked them back off the face not a minute before it went. But it undid 3 weeks in an afternoon. Delia stood in the ruined cut with cold mud sucking at her boots and felt every one of her 61 years land on her at once. That night, she sat on the porch in the dark and did not cry, which took some doing, and Odell found her there. I can't, she said, before he could speak. Odell, I can't. Look at my hands. I'm broke and I'm old and I've got a debt I'll die under, and I'm digging a hole in the ground for a dead woman who won't tell me why. My sisters were right. I'm just built to lose. Odell sat down on the step below her, slow, his knees cracking like hers. My wife passed a few years back, he said, to the yard, not to her. 41 years we had. After, folks kept telling me to sell up and move to town where it's easy, and I kept not doing it, and I couldn't have told you why, except that this dirt is where she is now, and I wasn't going to hand it to somebody who'd never known her name. He picked at the mud dried on his knuckle. You're not digging for a dead woman, Delia. You're digging for whoever's thirsty come the next dry year. Iva knew that. Your mama knew it. That's why it came to you, and not to the ones who'd have sold it for a car. He stood up. Rest your hands. We go again Thursday. They went again Thursday, and the Thursday after, and on a gray morning near the end of it, with Eli holding the lantern and Odell reading the old iron with his palm the way another man reads a page, they backed the last of the lead plug out of the pipe, and for one held breath, nothing happened at all. Then the ground spoke. A deep, working groan came up through the stone, up through their boots, 60 years of held water remembering which way was up. Odell yelled at them to get back, and they scrambled for the steps. And behind them, the spring let go. It came up out of the pipe in a hard, clear rope of water and hit the stone and roared, and it was so cold the cellar filled with mist, and it ran silver in the lantern light and smelled the way Delia's whole childhood had smelled, and she had forgotten until that second. She stood on the steps with mud to her elbows and water rising over her ruined boots, and she laughed, and the laugh broke in the middle into something else. Eli was whooping, both fists over his head, mud to his chin. Odell stood with his cap in his hand and his head bowed like a man in church. Dutch ran the top of the steps and barked at the roar of it. The three of them crowded into the pantry doorway and looked down at what they'd let back up into the light, and for a long minute not one of them could find a word big enough to lay on it. If you've made it this far into Delia's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. The water was only the beginning of it. What that water was worth and what it would cost her to keep it was a thing none of them saw coming, least of all the two sisters who'd laughed her out of a lawyer's office over $5. They dug the channel to let it run. Odell rigged the old spring room the way it had been meant to run, the water pooling clean and cold in a stone basin, and the overflow carried off down the hill in a pipe to the dry creek. Within a week, the creek behind the house ran clear where it had run brown. Within 2, the pump in the kitchen, when Delia primed it and threw her weight on the handle, coughed rust and then ran sweet. And she cupped her hands under it and drank, and it ached her teeth, and she was 10 years old again with her grandmother's hand under her chin. The land felt it before the people did. Those 4 old apple trees pushed out more leaf than they had in a lifetime. The garden Delia had been keeping alive by the jugful went green and greedy. She dug beds she'd had no water for and filled them, and things came up out of that ground like they'd been waiting under it as long as the water had. Eli started sleeping in the mended back room instead of the car. It happened without a conversation. He came in one night out of the rain and never quite left, and Delia set a second plate without a word, and Dutch moved his bed to the boy's doorway, and that was that. The home place had somebody young in it again. They ate good that fall, for the first time in a long time, the 3 of them and the dog, at the plank table with the spring running cold in the kitchen behind them. Odell came most evenings. He'd bring a mess of turnip greens, or a jar of his late wife's chow-chow he'd been hoarding for years, and Eli would talk, actually talk now, about the seedlings he had going in the cellar under Delia's eye. Some nights the 4 of them sat out on the mended porch until the dark came all the way down, and nobody felt any hurry to break it up. She had gone looking for a roof over her head and found a table with people around it. She knew the difference, having spent a long time without one. It couldn't stay a secret, a place that green at the end of a dry summer gets talked about. Delia had a test done, because Odell insisted, driving a jar of it to a lab 2 counties over, and the man who ran the numbers called her himself instead of mailing them, which she'd learn later was its own kind of warning. "Ma'am," he said, "I test water for a living, and I don't call people. I'm calling you. Where is this from?" "My spring." "Why?" "Because it's about the cleanest thing that's ever come across my bench, and there's a lot of it. From what you're saying, that's not a well. That's a resource." A pause. "You want to be a little careful who you tell." She didn't understand yet what he meant. She would. The phone call from Charlene came 4 days after that, which told Delia all she needed to know about how fast news of that kind traveled, and who it traveled to. She almost didn't recognize her sister's voice. It had so much sugar in it. "Delia, baby, I have been thinking about you all alone out there, and I just feel terrible about how everything got divided. Beverly and I both do. A breath. I hear you've done wonders with the old place. Fixed the water, even. That's just wonderful. That water was always so special." "Grandma's water? Who told you about the water, Charlene?" "Oh, you know how the county is. Everybody knows everything. The sugar thinned. Delia, I'll be honest with you, because we're family and I've never been anything but honest with you. I've been talking to some people, and it turns out that spring may be worth a great deal more than any of us understood when we signed those papers. Which means, in fairness, it really should have stayed in the family. All of ours, not just yours. It is in the family. I'm the family that stayed." The sugar was gone now, all of it, in one breath, and what was under it was the voice Delia had been hearing her whole life across kitchen tables and lawyers' desks, the cool, flat voice of a woman who had decided. That place was supposed to stay in the family, Delia, not get grabbed up by whoever happened to be desperate enough to move into it. There are lawyers looking at that $5 signature right now, And let me tell you what they think about a woman signing away an asset like that for $5. Out the front window, down where the ruts met the county road, a car Dahlia didn't know had turned in off the road and was coming up slow through the trees toward the house. A clean gray sedan, city clean, nothing anybody around here drove. It came up into the yard and stopped, and the man behind the wheel sat a moment, looking the place over, and on the dashboard in front of him lay a leather folder, thick with papers, catching the light. "I'll call you back, Charlene," Delia said, and hung up on the flat, cold voice mid-sentence and went out onto the porch to meet the car. The man who got out was younger than Odell and older than Eli, in a pressed shirt with no tie, and he had a smile ready and a hand out before his shoes hit the dirt. He said a company name she didn't catch and wouldn't have known anyway. Something with the word Springs in it, which she'd think was funny later and didn't think was funny then. "Beautiful spot," he said, looking at the greened-up land, the loaded apple trees, the creek running clear behind the house. "You've done a lot with it. I heard you'd gotten the water running again. Word travels, so I keep learning. What can I do for you?" He came up onto the porch and she did not offer him a chair, and if that bothered him, his smile didn't show it. He talked easy. The drought came first, and it was real. 3 summers of it now, the reservoir down to mud flats, the county trucking water in for the first time anybody could remember. Then he moved to Growth, the new development going up on the north side. How a growing place needs water more than it needs anything, how the old valley wells were drawing down and turning up dry. "And then there's you," he said, "sitting on what our surveys say is the head of the whole aquifer, the best water in the region, and a lot of it, and it turns out, when we pulled the county records, the oldest claim on it too." He said this like he was handing her a gift. "That old grant your family holds is what they call a senior right. Predates everybody. In a drought, senior rights are the only rights that matter. Yours would come first. Before the town, before the new development, before anybody. I know what my grandmother's water is," Delia said. "I've known since I was a child. Then you'll understand the number." He opened the leather folder and laid a single page on the porch rail where she could see it. There was a figure on it. $1.5 million, for the spring and the rights that went with it, free and clear. The lien paid off as part of the deal like it was a rounding error. Delia looked at the number a long time. She would have been lying if she'd said her heart didn't jump at the sight of it. $1.5 million was every hard year she'd ever worked erased, was Eli set up for life, was never again counting nickels into a tea tin under a tax bill. It was, she understood, exactly the number designed to make a broke woman of 61 stop thinking. "And what would you do with it?" she said. "The water. Manage it, bottle some, pipe some to the town, meter it out where it's needed." He smiled. "Put it to work. Right now, it's just running off down your creek, doing nothing for anybody. Doing nothing for anybody." She thought of the ledgers downstairs, all those years of names, a bushel here and a winter's canning there, a whole valley that had once come to this door with jugs and left with them full and nobody billed. She thought of the man selling water back to the town his own company had first bought it out from under. And under it all, she heard her grandmother's voice, in the letter and in the pump both. "Cap it for one man and it turns." "I'll need to think," she said, which was not a lie, and he left the page on the rail and drove off down the ruts, and she stood there in the yard holding a piece of paper worth more than her whole life had ever added up to. And she had never in her days felt so much like she was standing at the top of a set of stairs in the dark. She drove into town 2 days later for tar paper and lamp oil, and she saw for herself what the man in the pressed shirt had been talking about. The reservoir off the county road that she'd known her whole life as a wide blue thing with boats on it had gone to a cracked gray flat with a puddle in the middle and a heron standing in the puddle. A water truck the color of a school bus sat in the church lot with a line of cars behind it, people filling jugs at the same spigot Dahlia had hauled her own water from all summer. She knew half the faces in that line. The diner had a sign in the window, hand-lettered, that said they were rationing and to please order water only if you meant to drink it. The woman who owned the place told Delia, low, that the new houses going up on the north side had first call on whatever water there was, some arrangement nobody in the old part of town had gotten a vote on, and the rest of them could stand in line for a truck. Delia drove home past brown yards and dead gardens, thinking about a single page on her kitchen table with a number on it, and about exactly who that number was meant to serve. Charlene came Saturday. She brought Beverly, and she brought a lawyer, though the lawyer stayed in the car the first hour like a dog they weren't sure they'd need. Delia met them in the yard, because she wasn't ready to have Charlene inside Iva's house. Not yet. Charlene came up the ruts in shoes made for a sidewalk, and she stopped and took in the green of the place, and the water running clear, and the 2 apple trees heavy with fruit. And for just a second, before she got her face arranged, Delia saw something cross it that wasn't greed at all. It was hurt. Charlene looked at the beautiful thing her sister had made out of the joke they'd handed her, and it hurt her. And Delia almost felt for her before she remembered the lawyer in the car. "Well," Charlene said, "look at you. Look at me. You should have called me back. I've been busy. Turns out a farm's a lot of work. You'd have to have done some to know." Charlene's jaw tightened. Beverly hung back by the fender, not meeting anybody's eyes. Her arms wrapped around herself, though it wasn't cold. "I didn't come to fight, Delia. I came to fix something that got done wrong before it gets worse. Those papers we signed, we all signed them thinking that place was a liability. It wasn't. It was an asset, a huge one, and none of us knew it. That's not a fair deal. Any court would say so. You signing $1 million water right away from the estate for $5, that's not a deal. That's a mistake, and mistakes get unwound. Mama left it to me," Delia said. "By name, you were in the room. Mama was not in her right mind at the end, and you know it better than anybody, since you were the one there." Charlene said it to wound, and it did. Half the time she didn't know what year it was. You can't tell me she understood she was leaving one daughter a fortune and the other 2 a used Buick. And there it was, the thing under all of it, said plain at last. Delia looked at her oldest sister, at the good coat and the hard, sensible face and the fear underneath it, and she understood something she should have understood years before. Charlene had spent her whole life certain that she was the one who'd made something of herself, and now the plain proof of a fortune was standing in a yard she'd laughed at, wearing her little sister's cracked hands, and she could not live in a world where that was true. "You didn't leave me the poor thing, Charlene," Delia said. "You left me the only rich thing there was, and neither one of us knew it. That's not my fault and it isn't yours, but I'll tell you what is your fault. You laughed, both of you. You put $5 in a lawyer's hand, and you laughed at me all the way to your cars, and now that it's worth something, you've remembered you're my family. I remember when it wasn't worth anything. I remember who was in the room then, and who wasn't." Beverly made a small sound by the car. Charlene didn't. "The lawyer's going to file Monday," Charlene said. "Very quiet now. You'll get the papers. You can fight it and spend every dollar of that water on lawyers, or you can be reasonable, and we split it 3 ways like family should, and everybody walks away whole. Think hard, Delia. You were never stupid, whatever else you were." They left. The lawyer never got out of the car, and that evening a certified letter's ugly cousin came anyway, hand-delivered, a notice of a claim against the estate and a petition to void the transfer, with a court date printed at the bottom in a month's time. It was Odell who put the last piece in her hand, a few days on. His cousin worked in the county office, and the cousin had seen the partnership papers on the new development up north and knew whose names were on them. Charlene's husband's firm was One. The same interests buying up water rights along the valley were the ones building the houses that got first call on the town's water, and the sister leaning hardest on Delia to sell was married straight into it. Charlene hadn't driven out here for family. She'd driven out here for a client. Beverly called once, late, at an hour when Charlene wouldn't have known she was calling. She kept her voice down the whole time. "I didn't know about his part in it. The development, I mean. I swear to you I didn't, Delia. Charlene never told me till it was already rolling." A long quiet came down the line. "I always just did what she said. My whole life, I did what Charlene said, because it was easier than the fight. I'm sorry. For the lawyer's office, for the laughing, for all of it, Delia didn't know what to give her, so she gave her the true thing. Then quit doing what she says, Bev." The line stayed quiet a while, and then Beverly said she had to go, and hung up before either one of them could find out whether it had landed. Delia laid the petition on the kitchen table next to the company's page with the number on it. 2 pieces of paper. One said, "Sell the water to a stranger and be rich." The other said, "Give 1/3 of it to the sisters who'd scattered, or bleed out fighting them." Neither one said the thing Iva had asked. Neither one said, "Let it give again." "You could just sell it," Eli said that night, careful, watching her face. "To the water company. Take the money, pay them lawyers off, pay everybody off, and we'd never want for a thing again. Nobody'd blame you after what they did to you." He meant it kindly. He was 19 and he'd been hungry, and to a boy who'd been hungry $1.5 million was not a temptation. It was a rescue. "That's just it," Delia said. "If I sell it to that man, he does the exact thing my grandmother spent the last of her life stopping. He turns the valley's water into something a family pays for by the gallon. The town's already dry, Eli. Come the worst of the drought, whoever holds this spring holds the town by the throat. Iva knew that. That's the whole reason she buried it, and I'd be handing it to the very kind of man she buried it from, for money, which is the one thing they can always find more of. So what do you do?" "I don't know yet." And she didn't. Whatever she decided, though, she wouldn't be deciding it alone, and that was new to her. Eli told her flat that he'd swing a pick in a courtroom the same as he had in the cellar, if it came to that. Odell said less and showed up more every evening now, a steadying weight at her table. An hour away, her blood was massing lawyers. Out here, the family she'd fallen into by accident was digging in beside her, and she was not too proud anymore to know which was which. She took Iva's sealed county paper to the courthouse herself, because she wanted to know exactly what she was holding. A young clerk in the records office spread it out, went still, then quietly fetched an older man, and the two of them confirmed what the company man had said. The grant was real. It was the oldest water right in the county by generations, and in the law that meant it came first, ahead of the town, ahead of the new houses, ahead of everyone. The older man looked at her over his glasses. "People would do ugly things for this piece of paper, ma'am. I'm not speaking in figures." Then he lowered his voice and glanced at the door. "If it were mine, and I didn't care to spend my last years fighting off men in nice cars, I'd go see somebody about putting it where it can't be sold. There are ways to tie up a water right so nobody can ever buy it out or draw it down. Not a company, not your own heirs, nobody. You dedicate it, put it in trust, for the town. After that, it's not worth killing for, because there's nothing left to take." He said it like a man giving directions to a place he wished he lived himself. Delia carried that home and set it down beside everything else. The company man called twice more that week, friendly as ever, to mention the offer wouldn't sit on the table forever, that the town's need was pressing, and his people would sooner do business with a neighbor than go some other road. He never said what the other road was. He didn't have to. A man who can afford to wait always takes care to let you know that he can also, whenever he likes, stop. Odell said the truest thing anybody said in those weeks, and he said it out at the spring, in the last light, where Delia had taken to going when the papers on the table got to be too much. The water came up cold and clean into the stone basin and ran off down the hill to the creek. Patient, buried and patient, asking nobody for anything. "You can't inherit water," Odell said. "Not really. You can put your name on the paper, but the water don't read. All you can do is be trusted with it a while, and then hand it untrusted to somebody else. Your grandmother wasn't the owner of this spring, Delia, whatever the county says. She was just the one it was trusted to. Now that's you." He looked at her sideways. "Question is only ever what you were trusted to do with it." He went home. Eli turned in. The house went dark behind her, and Delia stayed out at the spring alone with the dog, into the dusk and then into the dark, the way she did now. She had the company's number in one coat pocket and the court petition in the other, and she stood there between them at the head of her grandmother's spring, listening to the water her whole family had walked away from run cold and sweet and useless into the night, and she knew that whichever way she chose, she was choosing against a piece of herself. Take the money and be safe, and let Iva down and hand the town to a man in a pressed shirt, or keep it, and fight her own blood in a courtroom and stay poor and stubborn and right, as the old woman had, alone. Dutch leaned his weight against her leg, as he had for as long as she'd had him. Down the hill the water ran on, giving itself to a creek that asked nothing, and Delia stood over it and did not yet know what she was going to do. She knew by morning. It came to her the way the answers always came to her, not in the night when she was chasing them, but at first light, with her hands already busy, priming the pump, the cold, sweet water aching her teeth. She stood at the kitchen sink with the water running over her cracked fingers, and she thought about a bushel of apples given to a family whose crop had failed, and a winter's canning carried to a widow, and a lifetime of names in a ledger nobody had been meant to read. She thought about what her grandmother's water had been worth when it was giving itself away, and what it would be worth the day it was locked behind a meter. And she understood, finally, that the man in the pressed shirt and her sister with the lawyer were asking her the same question, and that the answer to both of them was no. She wasn't going to sell it. She wasn't going to split it. What she was going to do was what Iva had done, only she would do it out in the open, and she would do it for good. That evening she told Odell and Eli at the table. Eli set his fork down. He'd been the one arguing to sell, and she watched him work against himself. The hungry boy who wanted them safe, wrestling the young man who'd read Iva's ledgers by lantern light and knew now what the water was for. "We'd have never wanted for anything again," he said finally. "You know that. I know it. And you're giving it away anyhow." "I'm giving it back, there's a difference." Delia held his eyes. "Took me most of my life to learn it. I'd like you to learn it a good deal faster than I did." Eli looked at her a long moment, then picked the fork back up. "Okay," he said, "then teach me that too." Odell said nothing at all. He reached over and squeezed her shoulder once with his broad hand, and that was the whole of what the old man had to say about it. She found a lawyer 2 towns over, a plain woman who did land and water and nothing flashy, and she asked her the question the old clerk had planted. Could a person tie up a water right so that nobody could ever buy it or drain it? Not a company, not an heir, not the person who held it. The lawyer said it was called a dedication, that it was rare and it was iron-bound, and that it would cost Delia every dollar that water might have made her for the rest of her life. "I know what it'll cost me," Delia said. "I'm asking what it'll save." They drew it up over 3 weeks. The deep spring and its senior right would pass into a trust, held for the town, open to anyone who came with a jug or a truck or a need, and it could never again be sold, mortgaged, bottled, or shut. Not by Delia, not by anyone who came after her. The one thing her family had fought over would be made, on purpose and forever, into a thing there was nothing left to fight over. She had the old estate lawyer bring her sisters out to the farm to hear it, because she wanted it said to their faces, and she wanted it said on Iva's ground. They came on a bright, cold morning near the end of that first year. Charlene in her good coat, Beverly a step behind her, the old lawyer with his soft briefcase and his tired eyes. Delia met them in the yard, and Odell stood on the porch, and Eli stood by the spring house with his arms crossed, and Dutch lay in the sun, on the steps, and thumped his tail once and did no more. "You wanted us out here." Charlene said, "We're here. If this is about a settlement, my lawyer should be present." "It's not about a settlement." Delia handed her the trust papers. "There's nothing to settle anymore. As of this week, that spring belongs to the town. It's in a trust that can't be sold or drained by me or you or anybody's children forever. It'll water this town free the way it did when Grandma was alive, and no man in a nice car will ever put a meter on it." She watched it land. "There's no fortune to fight me over, Charlene. I gave it away, so you can call off your lawyers, because there's nothing left out here to win." Charlene read the papers. Her face went through several weathers. When she looked up, what was in it was not the greed Delia had braced for. It was something closer to grief, and it was aimed at herself. "You gave away $1.5 million, she said, barely a voice. "You had it in your hand. I gave away a headache and a lawsuit and a man who'd have owned this whole valley's throat by August. I kept the water." Delia's voice was not unkind. You never could tell the difference between those two things. That's the whole trouble between us, and it always was. It was the old lawyer who cleared his throat then and reached into his soft briefcase and changed everything that was left to change. "There is one more matter," he said, "and this is the proper day for it. Your mother left instructions, a letter, sealed, to be read to all three of her daughters together, 1 year after her death, and not before. She was very firm about the timing. He looked at the date on the paper in his hand. By my count, that's today, near enough, and here you all are, which is more than I hoped for. He put on his glasses. She wrote it well before she passed, before her mind began to go. I want that understood before I read it. Your mother knew exactly what she was saying when she said it. He unfolded the letter, and he read it out in the cold, bright yard, in Nadine's plain words, and nobody moved. My girls, it began. By the time this is read, I'll have been gone a year, and the fighting will be done or it won't. And I'd rather it were done. There's a thing I never told you while I lived, because I didn't trust it not to poison you, and I'll tell you now that I'm past being argued with. My mother left me a secret when she died. She left it to me to pass to whichever of my children could be trusted with it, and she told me I'd know which one, and to my sorrow, she was right. There is water under the old home place, the finest water in this county, and the oldest right to it, and my mother hid it so it couldn't be bought by men who'd have made the poor pay for a drink. She asked me to give it, one day, to the child who would keep it the same way. Give it, and not sell it. Give it to the one who stays. I watched you three your whole lives to know. Charlene, you were the strong one, and I leaned on you. And you never let me down, and you never once did a thing that didn't first ask what it would get you. Beverly, you were the sweet one, and you'd have kept it if Charlene had let you, and Charlene would never have let you. And Delia. Delia stayed. When your father died, she stayed. When I got sick, she gave up her work and her savings, and 4 years of her one life, and she stayed. And she never once asked me what she'd get for it, because it never crossed her mind that love was a thing you got paid for. That's the whole reason. That's all it ever was. So I did the only thing my mother's charge allowed me to do. I left Delia the home place and let the rest of you believe you'd cheated her out of a ruin, because I knew the two of you would take the money and go, and Delia would stay and one day find what was under it. She got the ruin, the rest of you thought. But I didn't leave her the worthless one. I left her the one that needed staying for. She was always the one who stayed. Forgive me for not saying so out loud while I could. A mother oughtn't have a favorite, but she can have the one she trusts. And God help me, that was never a choice. It was just the truth, and the truth was Delia. Be good to each other. Be good to that water. The lawyer folded the letter. The yard was dead quiet except for the spring, running clear off down the hill the way it had run for 100 years before any of them, and would run for 100 after. Beverly was crying, openly, one hand over her mouth. Charlene stood very straight and very still, and 2 tears ran down her hard face, and she let them, because there was nothing left in her to fight them with. Everything she had built her life on, the certainty that she was the one who'd won, that Delia was the one who'd lost, had just been read out in their mother's own hand and turned exactly upside down. "Mama chose you," Charlene said. It wasn't an accusation now. It was a woman finding out who she'd been. "Mama trusted me," Delia said. "There's a difference, and it took me all this to learn it. She didn't love you less, Charlene. She just knew you'd sell it, and you would have. You'd have sold it this month." Delia took a breath and gave her sister the only mercy she had. "But you don't have to be that woman the rest of your life. Nobody's making you. The water's given away. There's nothing left out here to make anybody hard. You could just come see it sometime. That's all it wants from you now." Charlene didn't answer. She turned and walked back down the ruts to the car, straight-backed, and got in, and sat there. But she didn't drive off. She sat with her hands in her lap, and she looked out the windshield at the greened-up ruin her mother had trusted to the daughter she'd laughed at, and she stayed there a long while, which for Charlene was as close to staying as she had ever come. Beverly didn't go to the car. She came and stood in front of Delia with her ruined face, and she said, "Can I help? With any of it? The town water, the trust, the trees. I don't know how to do a single thing out here, and I'll learn whatever you'll teach me. I just don't want to be the one who drove off anymore." And Delia looked at her middle sister, 64 and finally standing on her own feet in a cold yard, and she reached out and took her hand the way Iva used to, and said, Come Thursday, bring gloves. The rains came back that next spring, the way rain does, indifferent to everything people do while they wait for it. But the town never forgot the dry years, and it never forgot whose water carried it through the worst of them. The line of cars that used to wait at the church spigot came out to the home place instead, and Delia set a stone basin at the head of the lane where anyone could fill anything for free and put no sign on it, because Iva had never put a sign on it either. The worst of it had come that last August before the rains, when the town's trucked-in water didn't arrive one week and didn't arrive the next, some budget fight 2 counties away that the old part of town had no vote in. For 9 days, the home place was the only free water for 20 miles, and the lane stayed full from first light to full dark. Delia and Eli and Beverly worked the basin in shifts, and Odell kept the pipe running clean. An old man Delia half knew filled 4 jugs and stood a while and told her he'd bought Hollis water off her grandmother as a boy, a nickel a jug, except Iva had waved his nickel off every single time. She never once would take it, he said, still wondering at it. Neither will I, Delia told him, and he cried a little quiet, an old man weeping over a thing he'd long thought gone that turned out to have only been buried. The farm came all the way back, and then past what it had been. Eli grew things in the glass house Delia and Odell raised over the old orchard, and he was not a drifting boy anymore. He was a young man with dirt under his nails and a place his name was on the mailbox of, because Delia had put it there. Odell came to supper most nights still. The 4 of them at the plank table had become the truest family any of them had. Charlene came back that fall, once, on a weekday when she likely thought no one would make anything of it. She didn't get out of the car the first time. She sat at the head of the lane and watched the water run. On a later visit, she got out. She didn't apologize because Charlene was not built to shape those words and never would be. But she brought a pie she'd bought at a store and set it on the porch rail without a word. And she walked the orchard rows a while with Beverly. Before she left, she stood at the spring a full minute with her good shoes sinking in the mud. And she didn't seem to notice the mud at all. It wasn't everything. In a family like theirs, it was more than Delia had ever let herself expect, and Delia did the thing her grandmother had done, that her mother had trusted her to do, though nobody asked her to, and nobody would have known if she hadn't. When a girl no older than Eli had been turned up at the feed store one winter with a black eye and nowhere to be, Delia put her in the truck and brought her home and set another plate, and asked no questions, and showed her, in the cold, clean light of the cellar, how to take a cutting off a dying thing and coax the roots to come. The girl's hands shook the first time, and Delia steadied them with her own cracked ones and told her the thing Iva had told a frightened child over the same water 50 years before. You remember where good water comes from. Everything else, they can take off you. Not that. The girl didn't understand it yet. She would. They always did, if they stayed long enough to. She kept the $5 bill. Not framed, nothing like that. It lived folded in the tea tin in the cellar, beside her grandmother's letter and the ledger of all those given-away years. And once in a while she took it out and looked at it and thought about her sisters laughing in the good light of a lawyer's office over the worthless thing they'd handed her. They had taken everything that could be spent. They had left her the one thing that couldn't, and it had turned out to be the whole of what mattered. Being poor had never made Delia hard, and being proved right never once made her cruel. The water taught her that, if it taught her anything. A thing only stays sweet as long as it keeps giving. You cap it for yourself and it turns. On a warm evening late that summer, she stood at the head of the lane and watched the last car of the day fill its jugs and go. Taillights fading down the county road, and the girl called from the porch that supper was on, and Dutch, gray to the eyes now and slow, got up off the steps and came to lean his old weight against her leg, one more time. Delia put her hand down on his head and looked out over the water running free to whoever came for it, and she let out a long breath she felt like she'd been holding since a cold day in a lawyer's office. And she went into her table and her people and her plate, and she was, at last, exactly where she was meant to be.